The stakes may never have been so high. That's why each week we see environmental activists mobilizing to challenge the policies of Donald Trump. From climate change to drilling, clean air to healthy food sources, there is an urgency by activists to stop the president from rolling back regulations and reversing policies.
But what is the most effective way to respond? Marches, sit-ins, letter-writing campaigns? Well, to help us sort through strategies to protect the earth, we're joined by three environmental activists. Elizabeth Yeampierre is Executive Director of UPROSE and longtime friend of our show. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Phil Aroneanu is the Senior Campaigns Director for Purpose, a social movement incubator here in New York City. And joining us via Skype, Tanya Fields, the founder of the BLK Projek, which addresses food justice and economic development. Welcome all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, all right. Tanya, Ms. Fields, I would like to start off with you and everybody. This is sort of the same question. What can the environmentalism movement teach us in this day and age about sort of spurring people to committed action? Tanya, if you'd like to start.
I think in terms of, I think we've already learned a lot from the environmental movement. I think Elizabeth probably will be able to speak way more eloquently to me because she's still very much on the ground in terms of the work that she's doing. But there are already, we were environmentalists before it was called environmentalism, right? This was really about us preserving the spaces in our communities and making sure that we had access to what essentially was basic human rights, quality water, quality, air quality, as well as, arable soil to grow food and having access to the land. And then, of course, being able to build quality housing on those things. And I think, for many of us, we may not even have understood that we learn from environmentalism because we don't, the language sometimes can be exclusive, but for many of us, the things that we've been striving for would very much fall under the purview of environmentalism, even if people in our community are not co-opting the language to call it that.
So she speaks of like a truth that we all pretty much got on, that when people talk about environmentalism, they want to cast it as some crunchy granola, save the whales, but it's very much an urban and very much a Brooklyn issue.
Well, it's not just Brooklyn, it's the South Bronx, it's Richmond, it's Detroit, it's wherever our people live, because we've always had to struggle and exist at the intersection of all of the isms, and now it's climate change. And so Tanya's absolutely right. We started out in this movement as fighting against the disparate siting of environmental burdens in our community, and came into it really understanding that space and land is something that was central to our survival. And so this particular administration really poses a threat to us because we are at the intersection of all those things, and all of those things are what at stake right now. And so so it's overwhelming because it is multi-level, but it all is going to have a disparate impact on the most vulnerable in the United States.
And I would just add that I think in recent years, as climate change, the effects of climate change has really been clear to a lot of folks. They've been clear to many people for a long time, that environmentalism has really taken on this idea that climate is a civilizational issue, it's a human rights issue, it's not just sort of nature and humans. And so I think that there's beginning to be a sort of revolution inside the environmental movement, inside the environmental justice movement, to really recognize environmentalism as a much broader intersectional issue.
Well, speaking of it in a much broader sense, can you sort of put it into perspective for us from an international sense, where we are currently as this new administration moves forward?
This administration is denying that climate change is a problem, and we know, for example, that Yemen has no water, and that Bangladesh is moving its people upland. This is something that's going to seriously impact what we call the global South. So the global South exists here in the United States. It exists in Harlem and Brooklyn, but it also all over Latin America, the Caribbean, and in different parts of the world. And so as this administration decides to pull away from agreements, international agreements that move us away from that support fossil fuel extraction, it's putting the entire world into harm's way. Not just us, but the world. And it's certainly putting the global south in harm's way. So you're going to see places like New Orleans and the South experiencing more extreme weather events with no opportunity to really operationalize what we call just transitions, to move away from fossil fuel extraction to a regenerative economy that puts us in a path so that we can start slowing down the changes that are coming. So it is international. It's not just how it's going to affect us here.
So Tanya, knowing that it is international and looking at Scott Pruitt now heading up the EPA, that might seem pretty far removed from a lot of the spaces that we inhabit here in the city. How are you instructing people to move forward with that news and like continue to resist at all levels, whether it's letter writing or just showing up to your local actions?
So Scott Pruitt denies that there's even a climate change issue, right? He's been the biggest critic of the EPA, and then the administration, in its infinite brilliance and sarcasm, decides that they're going to make this man the head of the EPA. I mean, that's a big FU to folks all over America and all over the world. It essentially is saying that our administration is backhandedly, dismantling the one federal institution that's supposed to oversee, environmental protection.
Right.
And many of us probably sitting here, even under the circumstances, had serious critiques of how the EPA ran and who it was protecting and for what purposes. And so this now seems very, very dangerous. And for me, my work is much rooted in doing the work on the ground, building alternative institutions, hunkering down and preparing ourselves for, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. And, I think I always try to tell people there's a role for everyone. So there are folks like Elizabeth Yeampierre, who is doing amazing work with youth in Brooklyn and teaching these young folks how to organize, and they are then going and doing peer-to-peer teaching and organizing. I am not on the ground as much doing the, sort of the grassroots organizing. I am very much here in the Bronx trying to build alternative institutions. So really concentrating on how do we use outdoor urban spaces not only to grow food, right, but also using them as environmental ways to offset some of the really negative impacts that we are facing. I live in the South Bronx. I'm in the Hunts Point, Longwood area. We get 16,000 diesel truck trips every day coming through this community. 16,000 every day, not every week, not every month, every day. What a lot of people don't know that when Sandy hit us, had it hit us just 6 hours earlier, much of the Bronx in this area would have sustained, long-standing damage, and lives may have been lost. And so for me, it's like, how do we talk with folks in our community and really press these businesses who are negatively impacting us here to be doing things like putting certain things on their roofs? How are we creating community gardens and urban?
Yeah, while you fix your audio, give us 1 second. But just like Phil, to talk to you about that national scene, to see that he is heading the EPA and people are worried about what's going to happen with the Paris Accords and these other international agreements that the U.S. has signed in on. What is the feeling in the international community? Are they all like looking at America and aghast, or are they laughing at us now? Like, what? Are people scared? Like, what's the feeling?
I think probably all three of those. People are scared. They're definitely laughing at us, and they're really fearful of what Scott Pruitt will do as EPA administrator. What he does will most certainly have impact, especially on those folks who are suffering the most from dirty air and dirty water, and who have benefited the most from the kinds of regulations that are out there right now. One of the things that Scott Pruitt can't do is turn back the clock on the clean energy economy. Just this past year, more clean energy was installed than fossil fuel energy. And the question now is, how do we ensure that the benefits of that energy go to those who are most impacted by climate change and most impacted by dirty air and dirty water? I firmly believe that the kinds of institutions that Tanya is building, that Elizabeth are building, and that communities all over the country are building, that are owned by citizens, that are run by citizens, that are built by people who live in the communities, are the ones that should benefit. But we also know that regardless of what kinds of regulations Scott Pruitt turns back, that the clean energy revolution, whether it's solar or wind or community-based farming, those are all out there, and they're going to continue to expand because they're common sense.
Yeah.
What are, Elizabeth, what would you say are the biggest sort of hurdles right now to environmental activists here in New York City?
Well, I think one of the biggest hurdles is that we need to not only pace ourselves but use our time and our work with each other strategically, because we are now being called on to respond to a lot of different challenges. So, you know, I always say that we can't choose between fighting against racial injustice and climate change, that we have to do all of that. And so now it's immigration, it's ICE, you know, it's maybe it's DAPL, or you know, we are, because we are intersectional, because the climate justice movement always has been. It means that we're being pulled in a lot of different directions and at a lot of different levels. So it is important that, and you know, I have to agree with Sister Tanya that it is important for the people that are building institutions that focus on that, and that folks that can advocate on a level that are working with federal institutions focus on that. We need to be really smart about how we use limited resources, because even those resources are going to be threatened as the resistance begins to grow. There's going to be a look at, okay, where is it coming from, and how do we defund them? How do we make it impossible for them to be able to push back? So we have to be really creative on how we hold the line and how we make sure that there is a sustained presence that is built and rooted in our resistance. And right now it's coming at us from every direction. Remember, we're not environmentalists, we're environmental justice activists. Right. We came to this conversation because we couldn't breathe, not because we were into big, you know, gardens and trees, even though those things are beautiful, but those things are luxuries in our communities. It was really about our ability to breathe. So yeah, it's vast, and it's coming very quickly, and so there's a lot of different places where we can land, but we have to do it together in a way that I think is strategic.
So looking at some of those strategies, so I wonder if there's something new that's emerging, or ways that you've seen people resisting or asserting the way that they feel to make it known in their environment locally and all the way up to the levels of the people who are making the important decisions.
Well, as Elizabeth said, I think people are not one-issue people, and therefore our movements can't be one-issue movements. And I think this administration has really proven that they're willing to attack everybody who's vulnerable in any way at the same time, whether it's nominees for the Department of Education and EPA and the Secretary of State. So I think it's incumbent on us to build the kinds of intersectional movements that we've always wanted to see. And in this moment, I think there's a great opportunity to do that. We saw this on January 21st when more than 5 million people marched around the world at women's marches. And among the top issues that we saw there, in addition to reproductive justice and other issues and education, were environmental justice. Right. One of the top issues that people reported that they wanted to be there for. We're seeing this in the corporate campaigning space, where campaigns, grassroots campaigns that sort of bubbled up seemingly out of nowhere, like Delete Uber, targeting the CEO of Uber, who was on Donald Trump's Business Advisory Council, who eventually pulled off because almost 250,000 people deleted Uber from their phones. Those are the kinds of really innovative campaigns that are going to build on top of the shoulders of grassroots organizing to deliver the kinds of results and that we need, and push back against these policies that are targeting people around the country.
I also want to add that while we are looking at what Trump is doing, we're also looking very closely at what our elected officials are doing here on the ground. Both our mayor, our governor, our council members, our representatives. And we're going to expect more from them than we have in the past, because what we find is that our communities are stuck between an administration that wants to eliminate us and folks who we elected who are cutting deals with developers, and so that we have to deal with climate change while we're dealing with displacement. So a lot is going to be expected of them, that they like step up and represent us in a way that is more aggressive than it has been in the past.
Well,
and so we're seeing that happening.
You know, how do you sort of the president's plan to sort of rebuild the infrastructure here in our country. How does that play into an environmental framework?
Especially, let's go to Tanya and let her answer that first. You're talking about the Cross Bronx and all the environmental concerns from all these trucks and pollution there. Where do you want to see that infrastructure and development money that both sides seem to be, oh, that's so nonpartisan, let's pump money into the infrastructure. Where do you want to see that money go?
You know, I have to start with a disclaimer. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, good.
I have to start with a disclaimer that I don't have any confidence that our current that 45 is actually going to build any infrastructure. I don't have any confidence that that's going to happen. I think that any infrastructure that is going to be built is going to be at the might of the people who are demanding that it be built, and we've already been doing that. You know, I was part of a campaign here, and I think. You know, I just want to say that in terms of building that infrastructure, what that probably is going to call for is the dismantling of a lot of existing infrastructure that is making people in our communities sick, and communities like ours very sick. And so I think where the infrastructure needs to come in as we are talking about dismantling dirty technology, and businesses that are over-reliant on fossil fuel is really making sure that we are demanding that there is clean energy infrastructure, that there's more money on a national level put into renewable energy. And I think, and this is something that, you know, when I first started doing environmental work over 10 years ago, about very heavily, and you had national thought leaders like Van Jones talking about it, and the demand and the training did not keep up with the actual job opportunities that were there. This idea of clean energy, clean jobs, you know, and then we started renaming it and calling it, you know, calling it economic inclusion, all those different types of things. I think as we're demanding that, we have to be making those intersectional connections around making sure that people in our communities who are suffering at higher levels of joblessness and underemployment are the
first in lines to get all those benefits. Thank you, Tanya. We just ran right up into our time. We love Van Jones. We'll be watching, but we'll also be listening to you guys. Thank you so much for sharing today, and thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Tanya.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Phil.
it.